During the company dinner at the boss's house, I saw with my own eyes what I had always feared but never had the courage to face. The man who signed my salary, toasted me at happy hours and smiled at me at every monthly meeting had his lips glued to my wife's neck. It wasn't a discreet kiss. It was a long, intimate, shameless kiss. A gesture of someone who didn't care about being discovered. A gesture from someone who had been too comfortable with the situation for a long time. She didn't back down. On the contrary. She smiled, closed her eyes and bowed her head, as if she were giving her soul to him. And it was there, standing in front of the dining room, with the glass of wine still in my hand, that I realized that everything I believed I had built, marriage, partnership, family, stability, had been silently dismantled from within. I didn't scream, I didn't break anything, I didn't cry. I just downed the wine and made a decision that would completely change the course of my life. I gathered the guests with a calm that scared even myself. I asked for silence, smiled and said, in a firm voice, that I had an important announcement to make. I turned to her. She turned pale. The boss tried to hide his discomfort by adjusting his shirt collar, but the tension was so thick that the air seemed to cut off. So I said, loud and clear, that I was asking for a divorce right there, in that room. That I couldn't stay married to someone who betrayed my trust with the night's host himself. Silence. A colleague dropped the glass on the floor. Another put her hand over her mouth. The boss's wife ran out of the room. But my wife, she just looked at me. He didn't apologize, he didn't say anything. She knew that I knew. And she seemed relieved that she didn't have to hide it anymore. The boss, in turn, was paralyzed, trying to control the damage with empty corporate speeches, as if he were in a results meeting. But it was already too late. The damage was done. Their betrayal destroyed me inside, but it didn't kill me. Not that night. And not even in those that came after. In the first few days, of course, I sank. I spent sleepless nights, looking at the ceiling, mentally repeating everything she had ever said about love, about the future, about fidelity. I remembered the promises exchanged on trips, the smiles at breakfast, the good morning messages that now sounded like farces. Everything went up in smoke. I was swallowed by the shame of being the last to know, by the disgust of having hugged my boss at the end of the day while he hugged my wife in the dark. But something inside me refused to be reduced to victimhood. I needed to rebuild myself, but not like before. I needed to be better than before. Stronger, more aware, more ruthless. It was in this process that I rediscovered parts of myself that were buried by routine and emotional blindness. Betrayal stripped me naked, and beneath this emotional nakedness, I discovered that there was still a lot intact inside me. I started taking care of myself like I hadn't done in years. I went back to the gym, changed my haircut, reorganized my routine. But the main thing was inside, in the heart. It's not about revenge, although, I confess, I wish they both suffered deeply. It's about not giving me away. Not allowing my story to end like a man betrayed and humiliated at a company dinner. I needed a new narrative. And I started writing it with discipline. I looked for legal, psychological and emotional support. And with each step taken, the pain turned into fuel. But what no one expected, not even me, was that the most impressive turnaround in my life would emerge from this very ruin. When I had already accepted that love was a trap and that trusting someone was crazy, I met her. It wasn't in a bar. It wasn't on an app. It was at an unpretentious networking meeting, a month after the scandal. She was there, with a serene smile, a light and firm presence at the same time. We started talking, and for the first time, I felt seen. Not like the betrayed man. But as someone worth listening to. The meetings multiplied, the conversations deepened, and before I knew it, I was feeling something I had already forgotten existed, peace. The real one. The one that doesn't scream, doesn't pressure, just flows. Meanwhile, the cheating couple faced their own consequences. The relationship that began in the shadows did not survive the light of day. They were not happy. They had no support. They were unable to bear the weight of social judgment. Their every step was followed by distrust, by veiled contempt. The company, in a moral crisis, removed them. The wife who swore eternal love to me and then love for her boss now begged to talk. But it was already too late. I had rebuilt myself. And there was no longer any place for her in my new life. The irony of it all is that by trying to destroy me, they freed me. I became a better person not because of them, but in spite of them. Now, every time I pass by the house where that dinner took place, I don't feel angry. I feel proud. Because it was in that place that I died. But it was also there that I began to be reborn. And today, when I wake up next to someone who really respects me, when I walk with her hand in hand on the street, when it's just the two of us laughing at the simplest things, I understand that the betrayal I received wasn't a curse. It was a door. And as cruel as it was, I crossed it. What no one knows, and perhaps I never had the courage to tell them, is what exactly I did the week after dinner. Because there was something that I never revealed to anyone. Something that was the exact turning point, the moment I went from being a wounded man to becoming someone who controlled his own story. A decision that not only freed me, but completely changed the course of the lives of those who tried to destroy me. And that's when everything starts to get even more interesting. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support, romanticize or justify any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictitious, but they reflect real pain, because the betrayal destroys, corrodes and leaves deep marks. Our objective is clear: show how every choice has a price, and how the truth always finds its way. Now take a deep breath. Get ready. Because what you're about to hear. It's a shocking story. Jonathan has always been a silent man in his ambitions, but grand in his gestures. I worked as a financial analyst at a multinational and had a methodical, disciplined, almost predictable routine. His days started early, with black coffee and newspaper, and almost always ended with a book in his hands and instrumental music playing softly throughout the house. He was the kind of man who liked order, who believed that time, when well taken care of, brought solid rewards. Nothing in his life had been achieved without effort. From a young age he learned that love, respect and success did not come from promises, but from constancy. And it was exactly this constancy that had guided him to her, the woman he believed to be the missing piece in his perfectly assembled puzzle, Laura. Laura had her own light. She was one of those women who entered a room and changed the emotional temperature of the people around her. Working at the same company as Jonathan but in a different department, she was a communications manager and, unlike him, had an outgoing presence. Where Jonathan was introspective, she was engaging. Where he was calculation, she was words. But it was precisely this difference that attracted them. He saw in her the color that was missing in his otherwise gray life. She saw in him the safe haven she never had. Their meeting was gradual, built over coffee in the hallway, smiles exchanged in the elevator and small gestures that, without them realizing it, were transformed into a silent, firm, almost inevitable connection. Their relationship began with the lightness typical of something promising. Dinners on weekends became the rule. The conversations continued until the early hours of the morning. Before long, they shared the keys to a spacious apartment in a quiet neighborhood, with a balcony facing the sunrise. It was the kind of place that seemed made for witnessing a love story that would last a lifetime. And for a while, it lasted. The house they chose together was filled with travel pictures, shared books, plants cared for by both and a routine that, although simple, was filled with affection. On Sundays, while Jonathan prepared coffee, Laura wrote in her diary. On birthdays, there were surprises, and on bad days, welcoming silence. They seemed to have found the rare balance between intimacy and freedom. Jonathan, even though he was methodical, made a point of surprising her with flowers on Tuesday or impromptu dinners on any given Wednesday. Laura, in turn, transformed everyday life into poetry. She wrote notes, recorded voicemails singing out of tune, and laughed at his lame jokes with genuine enthusiasm. Over time, both grew within the company. Jonathan took on bigger projects, became a respected name among directors. Laura, with her charisma and ability to articulate, also gained visibility. The professional environment that was previously the scene of the birth of the relationship, gradually became a territory of silent tension. Their ascension required dedication. Agendas filled up, commitments multiplied, conversations started to have fewer pauses for laughter and more worries about deliveries and deadlines. Jonathan didn't complain. He always believed that it was normal for, at certain stages in life, love to go on hold. Laura, on the other hand, seemed to deal with the changes in a more restless way, as if something inside her began to desire something that even she herself did not fully understand. Despite this, they remained together. Routines adjusted. The kisses became faster, the touches more formal, but there was still affection. There were still enough memories to maintain the bond. Jonathan, even on the most stressful days, maintained the habit of writing her small messages on post-its on the refrigerator. Laura had the habit of keeping each one of them in a box, like someone collecting pieces of a story that they refused to erase. In the eyes of outsiders, they were the perfect couple, beautiful, successful, stable. Within the four walls, there were two worlds that tried to remain aligned despite the internal earthquakes that began to emerge in unspoken silences, in emotional absences that no physical presence could compensate for. The proximity of the new general director, Marcus, brought a new dynamic to the company. Young, charismatic and with a history of impressive results in other branches, Marcus quickly won the admiration of his colleagues and the trust of the board. He was a man with a striking presence, attentive eyes and seductive speech. Laura, in her communications role, began to have direct and frequent contact with him. Business lunches, campaign briefings, weekly presentations. Jonathan, although he noticed this approach, never suspected anything. He trusted Laura with the innocence of someone who believes that true love is proof against everything. For him, loyalty was an absolute value. And he was sure she felt the same way. Invitations to corporate dinners have become increasingly frequent. Marcus liked to use his home as a space for integration between company leaders. A sophisticated environment, planned down to the smallest detail, with expensive wines, low lights, an elegant soundtrack and a relaxed atmosphere. Jonathan attended everyone, even when he was exhausted. He made a point of accompanying Laura, of showing support for the company and the new boss. Inside, I felt like something had changed. She was more distant, less present, and at the same time, more involved with everything that concerned Marcus' universe. Still, Jonathan ignored the discomfort. Not out of naivety, but out of fear of finding there a truth that I wouldn't know how to face. He was a proud man, but not arrogant. He knew that the years had changed them both. I knew that love needed to be constantly cultivated. And so, instead of confronting, he tried to win back. I booked trips, prepared breakfast in bed, left more elaborate notes. But the closer he got, the more he felt that she was far away. As if I were experiencing something in parallel, something that could not be shared. At night, lying next to him, Laura slept too quickly. And when he watched her, there was an absence in her closed eyes that hurt more than any unspoken word. Still, Jonathan remained. Because I believed. Because I expected it. Because I couldn't conceive the idea that everything they had experienced up until that point could have been replaced by something temporary. Over time, he began to notice small gestures. The way she hid her cell phone when receiving messages. The low laughter as he typed. How often she said she was tired to avoid intimacy. But still, Jonathan resisted the idea of questioning her. He was a man of faith in what he built. I preferred to believe that it was just a phase, a difficult cycle, something that would pass with patience and dedication. He wasn't the kind of man who created storms where there were only clouds. But he wasn't blind either. He just chose, out of love, not to look head-on at what was perhaps already screaming around him. The invitation to dinner at Marcus's house arrived with pomp. A celebration of winning a new international contract. All company leaders were invited. Laura was excited. Jonathan hesitated, but decided to go. That night, he wore his best suit, bought a French wine that he knew Marcus appreciated, and prepared to be with the woman he loved, showing himself to be present, strong, a companion. In his mind, it was another opportunity to show that, despite the turmoil, he was still there. In her mind, no one knew what was happening. But there was something in Laura's eyes that night that Jonathan hadn't yet deciphered. A mix of lightness and tension. Like someone carrying a secret too heavy to keep hiding. The house was full. Ambient music, laughter, clinking glasses. Jonathan circulated among the guests, chatting with colleagues, exchanging pleasantries. From afar, I saw Laura in more reserved, more intense conversations. I tried to ignore my uneasiness, maintain my composure. After all, he was a respected, mature, centered man. But something about that night, something about that climate, that atmosphere so meticulously constructed, made his stomach alert. And without even knowing it, at that moment, Jonathan's life was about to cross an invisible line. A line from which you never return. Jonathan walked among the guests with the understated elegance that always accompanied him, balancing his wine glass between his fingers as he smiled for quick greetings. Ambient music created a soft backdrop, and laughter echoed through the perfectly decorated house. The night seemed designed to celebrate, but inside him, a vague feeling of displacement insisted on tightening his chest. Laura, somewhere in the room, was talking to a group of colleagues, but he noticed that her gaze wasn't looking for him. She was too comfortable, too light, with a naturalness that seemed rehearsed. There was something about her gestures that didn't fit into the rhythm of the night. Jonathan noticed the looks she exchanged with Marcus, the restrained smiles, the brief touches on the arm during whispered conversations that would go unnoticed to inattentive eyes, but which for him became evidence of an abyss that until then he had tried to ignore. He tried to maintain his composure, but the images of the approach between the two repeated themselves like flashes, bothering him like sand in his eyes. He approached a small group by the fireplace, trying to distract himself with a conversation about international markets and new company policies. But even there, among influential colleagues, he felt strange, as if he were in a play whose script he didn't know. One of the directors commented enthusiastically about the new campaign led by Laura and how smart Marcus had been in giving her complete autonomy. Jonathan smiled politely, but the information cut through like a blade. Total autonomy. Off-schedule meetings, quick trips, joint decisions. He began to realize that what he thought were just professional responsibilities might actually be convenient permissions for something that crossed any ethical or marital lines. Still, he struggled to keep the doubt trapped. I didn't want to believe without proof. He didn't want to be the kind of man who accused before he knew. But instinct screamed. And at that moment, for the first time, he felt afraid. A different, deep fear that everything he had built was about to crumble without warning. Laura met him in the middle of the room and touched his arm gently, asking if he was okay. He answered yes, with a smile that hurt inside. She commented that Marcus wanted everyone to gather in the garden for a special toast, a thank you to the team for the successful completion of the contract. Jonathan nodded. They walked together to the garden lit by small lamps hanging from the trees, creating an almost cinematic scene. The glasses were raised, Marcus's words were polished, well articulated, and for a moment, the atmosphere seemed light again. But then, Jonathan saw a scene from afar that stopped him inside, Laura leaving discreetly with Marcus towards the side of the house, smiling and looking back as if sharing a secret. He wanted to convince himself that it was just a conversation between colleagues. But something in that quick escape, in the complicity of their gazes, ignited in him an anger he had never experienced. He went back inside, left the cup on the table and started walking down the hall in search of anything that could bring answers. He was not a man of impulses, but he felt himself on a dangerous edge, as if each step was pushing him closer to a cruel truth. He climbed the stairs silently, not knowing exactly what he was looking for, until he heard muffled voices behind a half-open door on the second floor. He approached slowly, controlling his breathing, his heart beating hard in his chest. Her voice was soft, laughing at something. His, lower, almost a whisper. Jonathan couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough. He cautiously pushed the door open, and the image in front of him was stuck in his retina with the clarity of a blow, Marcus leaning over Laura, his lips touching her neck with an intimacy that was impossible to mistake. Her hand rested on his shoulder naturally, like someone who had done this many times before. For a few seconds, Jonathan remained still, paralyzed, as if his body refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. The air felt heavy, difficult to breathe. Laura saw him first, and the smile on her face immediately disappeared. Marcus walked away abruptly, trying to compose himself, muttering something that Jonathan didn't hear. Silence settled in like a bomb about to explode. Laura opened her mouth as if to say something, but Jonathan raised his hand in a firm gesture. I didn't need explanations. What I had seen was more than enough. He turned and walked slowly down the stairs, each step weighing like cement on his feet. He stopped in the middle of the room, where the guests were still chatting carelessly. Everyone fell silent when they saw him. The sound of the music seemed distant now, as if it came from another time. Jonathan asked for everyone's attention, his voice firm, without tremors. The room fell silent, eyes turned to him with curiosity and expectation. He looked around, searching for the familiar faces that had so often stood by his side at team lunches, tense meetings, and corporate celebrations. And then, like someone ripping off a mask, he revealed that he was separating. I said out loud that I had just witnessed something no husband should ever see. And he pointed, bluntly, at Marcus and Laura. The shock was immediate. Murmurs began to spread like wildfire. Some people tried to look away, others stared in complete amazement. Marcus tried to intervene, but Jonathan didn't give him space. He just said that anyone who doesn't respect their own values is in no position to lead anyone. And that, from that moment on, he was no longer part of not only that marriage, but also that farce disguised as a team. He turned his back and left the house without saying another word, ignoring the calls, the looks, the silent requests for explanations. Outside, the night seemed even darker, but inside him, a flame was beginning to grow. It wasn't fury. It was clarity. A clarity that was accompanied by pain, yes, but also by a strange relief. Because now he knew. And there was no need to pretend anymore. The path from then on would be difficult, but it would be his. And what no one at that dinner could imagine was that Jonathan wasn't just walking away from a relationship. He was about to start something much bigger. Something that would change not only his story, but the fate of those who crossed his path in such a cruel way. And there was still one thing. A truth he kept. A detail that not even Laura knew. Something that would make everything even more unpredictable. But that would come later. The morning after dinner, Jonathan woke up before the sun. He hadn't actually slept, he just closed his eyes a few times, like someone trying to trick the body and convince it to rest when the mind is still screaming. The apartment now looked different. The walls reflected a strange emptiness, as if every object had witnessed what happened and silently abandoned it. Laura didn't return that night. And he didn't care. For the first time, I didn't want explanations, I didn't want promises, nor tears. The betrayal was already absorbed. It hurt as much as the soul could bear, but there was no more room to continue bleeding. He got up slowly, drank a bitter coffee and spent the next few hours in silence, looking at the city from the balcony. That same morning, he sent a formal email to the company's legal department requesting his resignation. There was no anger, just decision. And with that decision, he started moving pieces that had been ready for weeks, just waiting for the right moment to be placed on the board. What no one knew, not Laura, not Marcus, not his colleagues at the company, was that Jonathan had been preparing his departure for a long time. The trust he placed in people was always accompanied by a sharp sixth sense. I had noticed signs months ago, even before the relationship with Laura cooled. But instead of confronting, he decided to observe. And in that time, silently, he built something that no one expected. He bought a stake in a promising financial startup whose founders had worked with him years before. The negotiation was carried out through an intermediary partner, and his name never appeared in the main documents. When he decided to leave the company, he didn't do so empty-handed. He took with him a strategic charter and the freedom of someone who already had a place to start over. But that wasn't the secret. The secret was bigger. It was more human. Deeper. And it had been guarded by him since before the relationship with Laura even began. Later that afternoon, she showed up at the apartment. He entered slowly, as if he knew that every step inside was dangerous. He didn't say anything right away, just walked to the kitchen and leaned against the counter. He didn't look at her. He continued writing in his notebook, his handwriting steady, controlled. Laura took a deep breath before saying that she wasn't there to justify herself, that she already understood what she had lost and that there was probably nothing that could be done. Jonathan then stood up, faced her with a look so calm that it scared her more than any scream. He said he didn't expect regrets, but that he deserved to hear from her what actually happened. Laura hesitated, but after a few seconds she began to speak. He admitted his involvement with Marcus. He said it didn't start out as betrayal, but as admiration. That she felt seen, heard, stimulated by him in a way that she had lost in her relationship with Jonathan. She said she didn't have the courage to finish, that she was trapped between loyalty and desire. She cried as she said she didn't want to lose Jonathan, but she also didn't know how to go on. He listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, she walked to her room and came back with an envelope. He handed it to her. I just told him to open it. Inside was a letter. Not a farewell letter, but a document. A complete dossier, dates, records, screenshots of conversations, photos, receipts. Jonathan knew everything long before dinner. He had evidence that the affair had lasted more than 4 months, including a work trip that never happened. Laura put her hand over her mouth, trying to contain her embarrassment. But he wasn't finished yet. He asked him to sit down. He said he wanted to say something he never had the courage to say before. Something I had kept since before I met her. Something that, in part, justified his way of loving. Your way of surrendering. Jonathan said he had been married before. Briefly, in his youth, with a woman named Helena. An intense, youthful love, the kind that consumed everything. She became pregnant in the 3rd year of the relationship. It was a planned, desired pregnancy, but in the 6th month, a car accident took the lives of her and the daughter they were expecting. Jonathan survived. He spent weeks in the hospital and months in therapy. He buried his wife, his daughter, and the version of himself that believed love was enough. Since then, I carried immense guilt, as if I no longer deserved to be happy. When he met Laura for the first time in years, he felt like trying again. But there was fear. And this fear made him create a rigid emotional structure, where loving meant protecting, offering stability, never again risking the chaos he experienced in the past. Laura was in shock. I didn't know about that story. He had never mentioned Helena. He never spoke about his daughter. He then confessed that, during his relationship with her, he avoided having children not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Because the trauma still lived in him like an open wound. And even without knowing it, Laura often hurt him by questioning his fear of moving forward, of starting a family. Jonathan, teary-eyed, said he didn't blame her. That she never knew what he kept. But now, finally, everything was clear. He said he forgave the betrayal, but what hurt most was knowing that even though he offered everything he could, it still wasn't enough. Laura cried in silence. She tried to touch him, but he backed away. He said it was goodbye. That she deserved someone whole. And now he needed to start a new story, but no longer carrying grief, fear, or pain. That she had been, in a way, the end of the cycle that began with Helena. The betrayal, however cruel it was the breaking point that set him free. She tried to ask for more time, more conversation, more chances. But Jonathan was firm. He said he really loved her. But now it was time to move on. That night, he didn't sleep in the apartment. He grabbed his backpack, some clothes, and left without saying where. The next day, he flew to another city, where the startup was already waiting for him to start the new project. He left behind not just a relationship, but an entire life that was now part of the past. He carried with him only the memory of Helena, the image of the daughter he never knew, and a new courage, to love again, but this time, with truth, lightness, and choice. And so, without looking back, he took the first step towards a completely new story. Jonathan left the apartment without fuss, without saying goodbye. He just closed the door behind him with the lightness of someone who finally understood that he didn't need noisy closures to move forward. The taxi was waiting for him on the street, and with it, the certainty that everything that needed to be said had already been said. The past, which until then had kept him trapped in a contained life, now closed like a book whose pages he no longer needed to reread. The flight was scheduled for 2 hours later. A new state, a new project, a new life. As he looked out the car window at the city, Jonathan no longer thought about what he had lost, but rather about the space that was now opening up inside him, finally ready to be filled with something other than weight or silence. There was no anger. Not even longing. There was space. And space, he knew, was the beginning of freedom. On the plane, he sat by the window and put on his headphones. The instrumental music he chose seemed synchronized with the sound of the engine. The flight time would be short, but symbolic. It was like going through a portal. During the journey, he thought about Helena, but without pain. For the first time in years, her image wasn't accompanied by guilt or what-ifs. It came as a sweet presence, as a sign that he was doing what he should have done a long time ago, living. He thought of Laura too, but in a distant way, as someone who was part of an important chapter, but who wouldn't fit into the next pages. He felt compassion for her, not hurt. And deep down, he understood his choices. Not all betrayals are born from the desire to destroy. Some are born from the cowardice of not knowing how to leave. Laura chose to cheat because she didn't know how to ask for change. And he, for a long time, didn't know how to offer space for that either. But now it was too late. And it didn't hurt anymore. Upon arriving at the new destination, he was received enthusiastically by the startup's partners. The office was small, modern, with glass walls and fresh energy. It was everything he needed. In the first few days, he immersed himself in his work like someone rediscovering his own strength. I made decisions, led meetings, structured teams. His mind, previously so stuck in the past, was now open to ideas, strategies, paths. And in the midst of this rebirth, she appeared. Clara was one of those responsible for the strategic partnerships sector. Intelligent, objective, with a presence that didn't shout, but filled the environment. They had short conversations at first, professional, polite. But little by little, the meetings became longer, the exchanges more intense. Jonathan realized that with her, he didn't need to defend himself. She didn't want to invade, just understand. And he, without even realizing it, started to let her get closer. On any given night, they stayed late at the office. The team had left, and only the two were left finalizing adjustments to an important proposal. When they finished work, Clara asked if he wanted dinner. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, but accepted. They went to a simple restaurant, far from the center. The conversation flowed naturally. They talked about music, books, childhood. Nothing about their painful pasts. Just the present. And in that lightness, something began to rebuild itself inside him. Clara was unlike anything he had ever known. I didn't idealize him, I didn't pressure him, I didn't compare him. I just listened to him. And so, he started talking. Little by little, he began to tell his story. First fragments, then entire memories. And she listened to everything without judging, without interrupting. When he spoke about Helena, she held his hand with a gesture that was as subtle as it was strong. And in that touch, Jonathan understood that he no longer needed to hide his scars. They didn't make him weak. They made it real. The relationship with Clara evolved organically. There were no requests, labels or promises. Just presence. She was not frightened by his silence, nor did she demand emotional constancy. I just accompanied him in his time. And Jonathan, little by little, made space for her within the life he had rebuilt. They began to share Sundays, then weeks, then dreams. Clara disarmed him with simple gestures, like preparing coffee the exact way he liked it, or leaving notes in his backpack with phrases that spoke about lightness and courage. And he, in turn, felt inspired to be better, not out of obligation, but out of choice. I didn't need to prove anything. Just feel. And I felt, with increasing intensity, that love was different. It didn't come to cure pain. I came to create a new story. A few months later, while walking together through an outdoor book fair, Jonathan received an unexpected message. It was Laura's. He said he needed to see him. That it wasn't about reconciliation, but about something important. He didn't respond right away. He showed his cell phone to Clara, who read it and returned it with a kind smile. I told him he should go if he thought it was worth it. And it was this gesture, this undemanding freedom, that made him sure of what he felt for her. The next day, he arranged to meet Laura at a discreet cafe. She arrived on time, visibly nervous. She was thinner, with deep circles under her eyes. He tried to smile, but his face didn't follow. Jonathan greeted politely, but without affection. She started talking, saying that she had started therapy, that she had moved away from Marcus, that she was reevaluating everything. But he interrupted gently. He said he hoped she was okay, but that there was no more room for that story in his life. Laura then lowered her eyes, took a deep breath and said that he deserved to know something. Something she had recently discovered. He said that, when looking through old files on the computer, he found a folder belonging to Helena. Inside were handwritten, digitized letters that had never been delivered. Helena talked about her fears, about the future she dreamed of with him, about the daughter she was carrying. But there was one specific letter, written 2 days before the accident, that changed everything. Helena said that she had discovered that she had a rare genetic condition, and that she had decided not to tell Jonathan so as not to worry him. I intended to wait until birth to start treatment. The letter ended by saying that, if something happened, I wanted him to continue living. That he would find someone. May he be happy. That the love she felt for him was not to imprison him in pain, but to free him from guilt. Jonathan was silent. Laura, with her eyes full of tears, said she didn't know how the letter got there. Helena had probably used her work computer and forgotten to delete the file. He said that when he read it, he cried for hours, and that he felt that it needed to be given to him. Jonathan held the sheet as if holding a piece of his own soul. He read slowly, each line like a breath of peace that crossed the years. When he finished, he looked at Laura and thanked her. He said that changed everything. Not in relation to them, but in relation to what he carried inside him. It was as if Helena had waited all these years to finally release him. He said goodbye with a sincere but brief hug. When leaving the cafe, he called Clara. He asked her to meet him at home. When she arrived, he was waiting for her on the porch, with 2 cups of coffee and an envelope in his hands. He told everything. He read the letter aloud. Clara cried with him. And there, under the orange evening sky, Jonathan knew he was complete. Not for forgetting the past, but for finally understanding that he no longer needed to carry it as punishment. Helena had freed him. Laura, with her pain, had helped him understand. And Clara. Clara was the new one. It was life starting over again without weight, without fear, just with the lightness of someone who, after so many losses, finally finds a place to rest. And that's how he decided to live from then on. Not urgently, not in a hurry. But with presence. Truly. With courage. Because now, everything made sense. The breeze from the porch blew gently as Clara approached and placed her head on Jonathan's shoulder. The envelope with Helena's letter remained between them, resting on the small table like a sacred artifact that had crossed time to offer not only answers, but liberation. Clara's presence at that moment was not an attempt at consolation, but a silent sharing of everything that life had become for him. She didn't ask, she didn't give her opinion, she just stayed. And this stay, calm and firm, began to mean something deeper than any promise said out loud. Jonathan didn't speak, but he thought. He thought about the irony of how pain had been the most solid bridge he had ever crossed, how betrayal, loss, silence and even death were all intertwined in the path that brought him here. And that was exactly why he couldn't be hasty. New love couldn't just be a successful escape. It had to be a conscious, clean, true choice. That night, after Clara fell asleep with her head on his chest, Jonathan remained awake, watching the ceiling as if reading an invisible letter written by life. An insistent thought visited him frequently: how much love, even in its most sincere forms, could still contain contradictions. There were no more doubts about his feelings for Clara, nor resentment regarding what was left behind. But there was a restlessness that pulsed more strongly every day. Helena's letter not only freed him from guilt, but challenged him to do something with that freedom. And it was there, in the silence of that early morning, that Jonathan realized that it was not enough to just live a new life. He needed to make sense of it all. He needed to transform what he had experienced into something that went beyond his own pain and began to touch the world around him. The next day, he looked for Clara at the office and told her that he needed time to think. She looked at him with surprise, but not fear. There was a rare type of emotional maturity in her, which allowed her to understand that true love does not imprison. He said that he would support him, that he would wait for him if necessary, but that the most important thing was that he found himself completely. Jonathan then got away for a few days, renting a small, secluded cabin surrounded by tall trees and natural sounds. He only took a few books, a notebook and the letter. And there, amidst the green and deep silence of the forest, he began to write. Not a diary, not a farewell letter, but the draft of a project that had been germinating within him since he lost Helena and that had taken shape after everything he had experienced with Laura. A reception center for people who, like him, carried invisible losses, deep pain, silent traumas. A space where people could transform their pain into creation, their stories into legacy. In the days that followed, Jonathan immersed himself in this project with the same passion he once dedicated to his career. He did research, established contacts, made plans. He realized that there was a huge social void for people who were experiencing grief that they didn't know how to name. Mourning of unborn children, of departed loves, of dreams that were buried alive. He knew, with every cell in his body, what it was like to live an apparent life while inside everything was crumbling. And I knew that if I had had a space like this years ago, maybe it wouldn't have taken so long to relearn how to breathe. The clarity of this purpose began to give him back a peace that didn't depend on anyone else, not even Clara. For the first time, he felt that his story, so marked by loss, could be a bridge for the reconstruction of others. When he returned to the city, he was transformed. Clara noticed in his eyes that something had changed. And it wasn't about distancing, but about a fuller, more solid presence. He talked about the project, about everything he had written, about how he intended to invest his time, energy and resources in it from now on. He said he didn't know what the future held for the two of them, but he wanted her to know that, regardless of what happened, what they had experienced together was one of the most important things that had happened in her life. Clara, with teary eyes, replied that she loved him. Not urgently, not fearfully, but surely. He said he wanted to be alongside him on this path, not to fill him, but to walk alongside him. Jonathan then hugged her, and there, in that hug, something was sealed. Not a promise of eternity, but a commitment to live truthfully. In the following months, the center began to take shape. A space surrounded by nature, with listening rooms, therapeutic writing workshops, support groups and art. Jonathan used his management experience to structure everything precisely. He invited psychologists, therapists, educators. Clara took on the communication part, mobilizing networks, connecting people. And soon what was a dream became reality. People from different places began to arrive, bringing their stories, their pain, their hopes. In each story, Jonathan saw a reflection of himself. In each hug received, I felt Helena's touch, as if she were there, approving each step, each choice. But not everything was simple. With the exposure of the project, the press ended up discovering the personal story behind the initiative. A journalist published an extensive article, telling in detail Jonathan's past, including Laura's betrayal and Helena's posthumous letter. The repercussion was enormous. Some treated him as a hero, others accused him of using his tragedy as a springboard. He found himself, once again, faced with a moral dilemma. Should you back off and protect your privacy? Or move on, knowing that her pain had now been made public? The answer came when a 19-year-old girl arrived at the center with a letter in her hands, saying that she had tried to take her own life, but that after reading the article, she decided to seek help. He said he wanted to transform his pain like he had done. And in that moment, Jonathan knew there was no going back. His story wasn't just his. And everything that happened, every loss, every fall, now took on real meaning. The relationship with Clara, contrary to what he feared, did not fall apart due to public pressure. On the contrary, it became even more solid. They learned to laugh at media distortions, to shield themselves from unfair criticism and to value what was true between them. They also learned to respect their own silences, not to wait for others to heal wounds that only time can heal. And it was in this balance that they discovered a way of loving that doesn't suffocate, doesn't demand. Just follow along. Jonathan was now no longer just a reconstructed man. He was a man who transformed. That served as a mirror, as a lighthouse, as a path. But there was still one last choice to be made, one last step before he could say he was whole. It was time to face Helena's grave. Since the accident, he had never been back there. He always told himself that he didn't need it, that he carried her memory in his heart. But now I knew that, to continue, I needed to close that cycle with presence, with gesture, with body. I needed to go there and say, out loud, that it was okay to continue. The morning he left for the small town where she had been buried, he took with him Clara, a bouquet of wildflowers and Helena's original letter. The road was silent, respectful. When they arrived at the cemetery, the sky was cloudy, but there was no threat of a storm. They walked hand in hand to the tomb. Jonathan knelt down, took a deep breath, and read the letter aloud. Then, he placed the flowers on the tombstone and said he was ready. He said that he loved, that he would always love, but that now it was time to love again, without guilt, without fear, with freedom. On the way back, Clara leaned her head against the car window, and Jonathan, for the first time in many years, smiled from within. A peaceful, full, definitive smile. He knew that what came next would still have ups and downs, but now he was no longer a hostage to the past. He was ready for whatever life still wanted to give him. Because, finally, I had understood that true love is not in the absence of pain, but in the courage to continue even after it. And this was just the beginning. A few months have passed since the visit to Helena's tomb, and the reception center founded by Jonathan was already a respected place, recognized not only for the visible results, but for the healing essence that spread among those who passed by. Each story shared within that space was a seed of new beginnings. It was not a place for victims, nor a refuge for self-pity, but rather a territory where traumas gained voice, where silence stopped feeling like a burden and began to echo like art. Jonathan had become more than an idealizer, he was now a living symbol of overcoming, someone who was not only reborn from the ashes, but transformed his ashes into fertile land so that others could flourish. But life, as always, never settles down. Even in the midst of stability, she finds unexpected ways to test the integrity of those who were once broken. One morning, upon arriving at the center, he received a legal notice. Marcus, the former director, had filed a lawsuit for defamation and undue exposure, alleging that the public impact of the story told to the media had damaged his image and his ability to find a new job. Jonathan, surprised, sought out his lawyers. The process was fragile, supported by arguments that bordered on delirium, but what bothered most was not the legal merit, but rather the audacity of someone who, even after everything, was still trying to turn the narrative in his favor. Jonathan decided not to respond angrily. He scheduled a press conference and, in front of journalists from different outlets, made a simple, direct and dignified statement. He said he never named names, that his story was his, that the right to tell it was legitimate and that he would not remain silent to protect those who hurt him. The repercussion was immediate. Public figures defended him, former company employees reported similar episodes and, little by little, Marcus' image crumbled once and for all. The court closed the case due to lack of evidence. Marcus, isolated, saw doors close one by one. He tried to rebuild his career in another country, but without success. He was left with anonymity, accompanied by the memory of the man he tried to overthrow and who, even so, chose not to take revenge. Jonathan never spoke his name again. Laura, in turn, followed a quieter path. After the last conversation with Jonathan, he went through a period of isolation. He changed jobs, cities, left social media, moved away from old friends. He blamed himself, yes, but he also tried to understand why he had allowed everything to get to that point. In the solitude of the nights, he revisited his decisions with the discomfort of someone who knows he destroyed something that, deep down, he still loved. He tried new relationships, but none of them worked. He always had the feeling that he was living with half of himself. The other half remained stuck in the past, that dinner, that kiss, that look from Jonathan that said everything without having to shout. One day, he decided to write a letter. Not to apologize, not to reconcile, but just to say thank you. Thank you for being who he was, for having loved you as he did, for not having responded with the same venom. He said he now understood that the biggest mistake was not betrayal, but the cowardice of not facing his own dissatisfactions honestly. Jonathan read the letter, smiled sadly and kept it among the other memories that no longer hurt. Clara and Jonathan, on the other hand, advanced in a calm direction, without major public demonstrations, but with an intimacy that grew stronger with each mutual choice to remain. They decided, together, to maintain separate residences, respecting their individual spaces. They loved each other lightly, without the need to merge to exist. And it was exactly this kind of love that saved them from losing themselves in each other. One late afternoon, sitting in the center's garden, Clara commented on the idea of expanding the project to other states. Jonathan looked at her with pride. He saw in her not only the woman he fell in love with, but also the life partner who, even without promising anything, was there, firm, from beginning to end. And when she suggested that they write a book together, combining real stories of people who passed through the center with reflections on grief and love, he agreed without hesitation. This was no longer just Helena's legacy, or Jonathan's pain. It was now the beginning of something bigger, collective, transformative. Months later, the book was published. It became a bestseller in a short time. They won invitations to lectures, events and television programs. But the majority refused. They didn't want to become pain celebrities. They wanted to continue to be a real presence in the lives of people who sought the center. One night, at the end of a discreet event, a young woman approached Jonathan and said that she read the book hidden from her parents, that she was in an abusive relationship and that, for the first time, she felt the courage to go out and rebuild her story. Jonathan held her hand firmly, told her she was not alone, and recommended one of the center's professionals to help her. When I saw her leave with her eyes shining with hope, I knew, without any doubt, that everything, absolutely everything, was worth it. And so, the days went on. Clara organized the writing group meetings, Jonathan guided the new volunteer mentors, and the center's garden, once an empty space, now blossomed with color and laughter. It wasn't propaganda happiness, it wasn't perfect. There were difficult days, heavy stories, relapses. But there was also strength. A strength that was born not from the denial of pain, but from the acceptance that living hurts, and yet, it is worth every moment. One morning, upon arriving at the center early, Jonathan walked to the room where Helena liked to write. He placed her photo on the table, next to a dried flower he had kept for years. She took a deep breath, looked at the sky through the window and was grateful. Not just her, but life. For everything you took, for everything you gave. For everything it destroyed, but also for everything it allowed us to build. Then he sat down at the reception piano, an instrument that was rarely used, and began to play a soft, improvised melody, which echoed as if telling his entire journey without needing words. And so ended a story that seemed to have been born from destruction, but which, in the end, revealed itself as a birth. Not a romantic, idealized renaissance. But a real birth, with pain, hesitation, blood, sweat, truth. Each character followed their own path. Some fell, some got up. But everyone, in some way, was forced to face themselves. And perhaps this is the greatest possible outcome, looking in the mirror and, despite your flaws, finding someone worthy of continuing. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Which part touched you the most? Leave your comment and tell me your opinion. It is very important for us to continue bringing stories that move the soul. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, take the opportunity now to subscribe and activate notifications, so you don't miss any of the next stories that, like this one, are made to touch, transform and provoke reflection. And remember, here on this channel, we do not support any type of betrayal. The stories are fictional and have the sole purpose of showing how wrong choices can destroy lives, and how the truth, no matter how painful it may be, will always be the most liberating path. Until the next story.